Boom. Hello, everybody. I missed you guys. Hello. Welcome to the live stream. It's open access. I haven't seen you for a while. So now we're meeting for our very highly anticipated deep dive on everything and anything related to the Arctic. Again, thank you so much for being here. If you're Honest Plus member, thank you so much. Mike Hawkins, new member. Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Hi, Michael. Hello. Yeah. Hi, Tidy White. Hello. Yeah, I just texted you the thing. So please invite your friends. It's open access. So if somebody wants to watch, please do so. We're going to dive. I also went a little bit more deeper on this dive just to get a bit more information because I'm nerdy. So we're going to get a lot of info today. So again, thank you so much for being here. I hope you're well. Your newsletter will arrive shortly. This week, I had a pleasure of having Novovirus, which is totally not a pleasure. I don't want to rate it 1 star. Please don't get it. Not a good thing. You forget where's up, where's down. So that explains a little bit why I was MIA. But I could write articles, but seeing me would have been a bit of, not a good look. But we're back. Okay, so just to put it into segments, what we're going to discuss today. And again, if I'm hanging, if I'm whatever, like you can't see me, you can't hear me, just type it and I'm going to reload. So we're going to start, of course, talking about Alaska. When it comes to the Arctic, when it comes to U.S. part of Arctic, of course, Alaska plays a huge role. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about melting front. We're going to talk about climate and communities and why does this and all the changes do play a role here. Then we're going to talk about U.S. strategy from Alaska. Then Russia and China on the other side. What are they doing? We have satellite maps. We have all the stuff. Then we're going to talk about Canada and sovereignty in North America. What is their structure and strategy? What it has been, what it is now, because Prime Minister Carney has shifted the narrative a little bit. Then we talk about the resource race and Indigenous rights, because that's a big part of it as well. And then finally, we're going to end with comparing Biden administration with Trump 2.0. What has changed? Right? So Just Lindy is here. Hi, hello. Looking forward to this one. Yeah, right. Yeah, you're from Canada. Absolutely. So I have the maps. Well, all I did half the day is like getting into the maps. So just to begin, we have to talk about Alaska, because if you want to understand the Arctic, you start in Alaska. It's where the US, Russia, China, and Canada strategies literally collide on the map, right? So why Alaska? It's the only US state, obviously this may be for our international friends, not from North America. It's the only US state in the Arctic that sits on Bering Strait, the future Gibraltar of the Arctic, just 55 miles from Russia. And essentially, when it's, the waters are freezing up, you can literally walk to Russia. It's actually about a mile even. So, but if you need to visualize it, that's what it is, right? So, some key points here. Alaska touches 3 critical seas. As you see here, it's Bering, Chukchi, Beaufort, and the corridor between North Pacific and Arctic Ocean. So the Bering Strait is already described by US military analysts, right, as of recent, as a future global choke point for shipping and naval operations, comparable to the Strait of Hormuz, whatever they pronounce it as, and Suez Canal. Now, because of its position on the Great Circles routes, as you see here, Alaska is closer to many northern capitals than the US, right? When the other lower 48. So, which is why US Army study called it the perfect power projection platform for US national security. So, this is so far so good. Then, right, this is just the basics. Then the climate front line, right? To put it short, whatever melts there creates space that is not empty, it's being populated by others, right? And it is, in fact, melting at really high rates. So, some core climate facts here. The Arctic is warming about 4 times faster than the global average, right? It's Arctic amplification. So, summer sea ice minimum has shrunk by 12.1% per decade since 1979. roughly 78,000 square kilometers lost each decade. 78,000 square kilometers each decade, an area larger than Ireland. So every 10 years, we're creating more space to be populated by whom? Larger than whole Ireland. So Alaska-specific human impact, of course, we have to talk about this, right? Because and apologies if I mispronounce this, but Shishmaref, Newtok, Kivalina, Nunapitchuk, and others are Alaskan native villages where coastal erosion, permafrost thaw, and flooding are literally forcing relocation after 20 plus years of warnings. And again, warnings that were affecting the people who are relocating now without giving them much option to relocate, right? There is no program that is financing their relocation, that would be facilitating it. There's nobody awaiting them anywhere, right? So in this regard, US sort of slept on it. But now, since all of this is happening and we're creating more land, so to speak, this is the motivating factor here for Trump to start monetizing it. And whom he ends up hurting is exactly those communities. And on that, we're going to have some stats soon. In Newtok, erosion has eaten about 70 feet of land per year, essentially destroying the old village. The model relocation to Murtorik is struggling with unsafe homes, no running water, and bureaucratic chaos, right? So again, those communities have nowhere to go. And when they do face, like as of recent, there was an earthquake and then tsunami wave was caused by it, and then they were suffering. And well, this was about like a year ago at this point, and then recently also Alaska was flooded. And when is the aid coming? Under the Trump administration, it took them more than a week to actually send people to Alaska and send funds. They actually yesterday issued an order sending more funds finally to help face the floods. I mean, like a month later at this point. Mike says the history of Alaska highway is fascinating too, if anyone likes that sort of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so here's a quote from experts in Alaska. Climate change is not a future scenario. It's literally moving entire villages, and the federal system is not ready for climate displacement, right? So essentially, shrinking ice opens more water. It's fishing, shipping, military competition right off Alaska's coast. And we're not really paying attention to that. But now Trump is paying, unfortunately, attention to that, and he's monetizing the shit out of it. So let's talk about U.S. posture in Alaska, right? So from periphery to power projection hub. And here we need the maps. So first and foremost, right, let's focus on the 2024, when Department of Defense was still Department of Defense. And this happened under Biden administration. They created the so-called Arctic Strategy, which focused explicitly on the seeing Arctic as the homeland, as central to homeland defense, obviously, if you think about the North, and competition with Russia and China, right? And then they invested more into US Northcom, right? The thing that we're tracking for Santa to bring presents, but also it's it's an essential protection, but also protection not just of our land and airspace, but also our trade routes, right? And they designated US Northcom as the Pentagon's Arctic capability advocate, right? So they put a bunch of funds here. Then Trump came in and he used planes, right? Because from this investment into US Northcom, they acquired more equipment, right? And then when Trump came in, he used the planes, US Northcom planes, to fly migrants to El Salvador, to Venezuela, and other places, right? So those are, if you saw military planes flying migrants, those were those planes flying them. So then priority themes. Domain awareness, right? Sensors and radars have been put there. Now, again, this is before Trump. Resilient forces in extreme cold, and the ability to project power from Alaska into both the Arctic and Indo-Pacific. As you may recall, President Biden at that point, he created the Quad was created under Obama, or the idea of it. Then Biden did expand on that, and he created bilateral agreements. as to if anything happens in the Indo-Pacific, we will be there to defend you. How does it look like physically? That means whatever we do have stationed in Alaska would be flying over and helping Pacific. So for that reason, the Alaska bases were very much essential. Russians could never have any access to it. Then, fast forward, Trump meets with Putin in Anchorage, Alaska, which allows Russian intelligence services to get a hold of whatever information needed to secure the space for their dear murderer president. So in that regard, and remember them walking together, and there were F-35s and B-2s flying. All of that had to be approved by Russian intelligence forces or whatever sources. So FSB essentially. And for that, they had to get access to whatever will be happening, by whom, how, and what the coding for it is. I'll let you, analyze if that is a smart move. So Alaska at this point is an air and missile defense fortress. Let's talk about what is there specifically. So Fort Greely hosts ground-based mid-course defense, the so-called GMD. Those are interceptors that are the core of U.S. homeland missile defense and Boeing-led project that completed 20 new silos, expanding capacity from 40 to 60 interceptors, right? Then there is Clear Space Force Station. And this is something that Trump did invest in because this becomes his new hub for the Golden Dome. Essentially, this is the home for long-range discrimination radar, the LRDR, now fully accepted by Missile Defense Agency and being tested as part of proposed Golden Dome shield to track missiles from Russia or China. Now, they are testing this whole stuff, right? It's not an official project yet, but it does. If you think about airspace, it does use Canadian airspace. Just get a map to visualize it. And we do have a map, right? So those are trade routes, but we're going to talk about that in a second. So essentially, if North Korea, right, or anyone else ever launched long-range missile at the U.S., the first of ICE and the first interceptors are largely sitting in Alaska. So, okay, this is if they do launch it from the Pacific. This also explains why, for instance, when Trump was flying to the Indo-Pacific now to meet with Xi Jinping as of recent, he was doing a stopover, in Qatar because he wanted to talk to them. But on the way back, he was literally stopping in Alaska to refuel. This is on the way. And then, nerdy as I am, I was thinking, okay, but what if something is launched at us from the other side? I know it's very theoretical. I don't think that Europe is planning to bomb North America anytime soon or launch any long-range missiles. But just theoretically speaking, then if we do consider this scenario, just hypothetically, right? Just humor me. Everything that Europe has, most of it, comes from where? From the United States. Right? So everything that Europeans are buying from the United States, what can they use it for? And most importantly, what can they use it against? Right? I mentioned maybe earlier that I did study law and this was USC code. So yeah, this is where I was diving in today. So essentially, can US supplied weapons be used against the United States? Right? Because we're not just talking about bombing our mainland or Alaska or anything. But what if, hypothetically, we were to invade Greenland? And Greenland is protected by European Union, the SAFE Act, which mostly uses everything that they bought from the United States, F-35, F-16, whatever the case may be. What if we were to do something in Canadian airspace? Or we're already doing this whole stuff in Venezuela. Who can Maduro in this regard, right? Well, he is butting up with Putin, but in other scenario, could he reach out for Europe to help, to, ask them to defend Venezuela from us, United States? Right? This hypothetically. Because what we know, and we talked about it a lot, that there is a rule against the third country. right? Essentially, if I'm United States and I'm selling you F-35 and you are Germany and you want to use it against other country, right? Let's say Russia that is invading Poland and you want to defend them. Under all USC contracts, and there's 3 paragraphs in every contract, Germany would need to seek US permission to do so, even when it is self-defense. This is just how the contracts are structured. So, and US could delay the approval. US can also, as we saw in practice, when US was under Biden administration, limiting the range of the weapons supplied to Ukraine. Remember when Ukraine would get weapons and they're like, oh, we were hoping that we can reach Russian military targets, but then turns out they cannot because US could virtually control it even from DC out. So here's the law. Now, foreign governments, right, anybody who buys US weapons are legally barred, right, or prohibited from using US supplied weapons against US forces or citizens. Okay. They're restricted under Arms Export Control Act, the AECA, and ITAR, right? ITAR. Violations would trigger immediate cutoff of arms sales, sanctions, diplomatic, or military retaliation. Also, U.S. states, police, National Guard, or domestic agencies cannot legally use U.S. weapons against the federal government. Now, this is something that you need to pay attention to, because when National Guard, that's supposed to be controlled by the governor of every state, they cannot legally use any weapons to defend themselves from the federal government. Now, Houston, we have a little bit of an issue here. This is also, doing so would be seen officially as treason, insurrection, terrorism, and unauthorized military use. Now, non-state actors, militia, terrorist, criminal groups, of course, are prohibited from, using any weapons. It's always illegal. What are the exceptions? The exceptions, and those are only theoretical. Self-defense in international law permits to use any weapons that you have. But in those contracts, it says that in practice, this can never come to occurrence, right? So with US supplied systems, you cannot use US supplied systems against US, even if you are defending yourself from US on your land. Feel me? So, bottom line, US weapons cannot be legally used against the US by allies, by US entities, or by anyone else. Violations trigger severe legal, political, and military consequences. Now, obviously, right, if, hypothetically, again, US has the bases in Germany, right? And if we were to go banana and we start invading Germans, right, from our bases inside Germany using, whatever weapons we have, of course, we're so powerful that we're going to, it will take us 5 minutes and we're going to bump the hell out of it. But this aside, Germany would need to ask us to defend themselves from us. You know what it is? So whoever signed this stuff really did not anticipate anybody at, being the leader of the so-called free world that would be against that free world and allies and would be willing to get a bit more land. So, Mike says the Golden Dome, what's up with him and gold, right? Yeah, that's like, I think he physically thinks it's gold. He says, my friends from, watching you live on Fanbase, please share the space, everyone, while this is live. Oh, thank you guys. Hello. Okay, if you want to ask questions, come over to YouTube and just type it. Ukraine can reach the targets now, according to refiners, and right, yeah, because of also Ukrainian capabilities. More on that will be in tonight's newsletter. They also created the very first drone wall which essentially just China tested earlier, and Ukraine started testing it already now. They also started mass production of things that literally knock out Shahed drones that look like baguette, like really, really tiny ones. More on that is in the newsletter today. So why would anybody buy U.S. weapons with all that's going on there? Mike, that's a very good question, but this is what we did, what others did during the Cold War period, because we were the stabilizer, right? We, meaning United States, we were the ones guaranteeing peace, right? So here we are. European nations need to make more of their own weapons, and that's the only way out, right? That's essentially the only way out, and I think they need to utilize Ukrainian capabilities, because Ukraine is also has, unfortunately, as stupid as it sounds, the benefit of testing it on the battlefield right away and advance their weapons. And Ukraine is now talking to different governments in different European countries. They asked me not to disclose the exact locations, but to start mass producing weapons that Ukraine came up with and is prepared to produce at mass scale. Now, Ukrainian government does not want to invest in that, because from their point of view, they see it as, okay, if I'm going to invest in mass production of those drones or any weapons, and those are happening hypothetically in Netherlands, right? What if Netherlands will start using it for their own purpose if Russia goes further, right? And we will never get whatever we're investing ourselves in. So in that regard, they're kind of like, struggling to get the funds for it. They're still hoping to get the funds from US, which I think at this point is a bit old school. Let's put it this way. Mike says Ukraine has the best drones. I agree, Michael, and I think that's what is coming. Yeah, and the best drones, not because of any extracurricular abilities, although Ukrainians are resilient and smart and fast, right, in adaptation, but they also have the ability to test it right away. So, and advance and enhance it also right away. So in that regard, this is important. Okay, so let's then continue on the air power, right? The Arctic Angels, so to speak. So what do we have there? There's an F-35 hub, right? Eielson, Air Force Base near Fairbanks has been built out to host 54 F-35A fighters with more than $500 million in infrastructure. Recent exercises like Arctic Gold 25-1, here's gold again, and Northern Edge 2025 focus on using Alaska as a launch pad to defend the homeland and project power into northern Indo-Pacific. So essentially, this is NATO practicing together with U.S. forces and advancing, right? And you saw, for instance, the Secretary General of NATO visiting Finland as of recent, also sharing whatever intel and planning collaboration in that regard. There's also Red Flag Alaska and other large-scale exercises that bring U.S. and allied aircraft to train in Alaska's vast ranges, rehearsing high-end fights and in extreme conditions. And the extreme conditions, when you are dealing with minus 40 Celsius, those are very relevant questions to be raised, right? Because that's what will limit essentially the scope of friends or allies who would come to, let's say, to Canada's defense, right? If you haven't trained with that, that would be that limiting factor. There's also 11th Airborne Division, those so-called Arctic Angels, reactivated in 2022. It's a specialized light infantry division based in Alaska, trained specifically for extreme cold weather and mountainous Arctic operations. So the experts say the U.S. is quietly rebuilding a Cold War-style Arctic front in Alaska, F-35s in the air, interceptors on the ground, and an entire division trained to fight in minus 40. So now, this is all good. Let's talk now about Russia and what Russia is doing. So Russia is across the water, obviously. And what do they have, what we don't really have? Of course, they have bases and missiles too. So what is their military footprint? And actually, I do have a map here, so we can visualize it a little bit better. Canada, where do I have? Okay, boom. So yes, it's tiny, so you have to kind of come closer. So on the right is Russia. On the left, you see Greenland and Canada. That's where NORAD, essentially, interceptors are. So on the right, you see the Russian bases, so to speak, the red dots. So Russia's Northern Fleet and Arctic forces run from Kola Peninsula to the Bering Strait with coastal defense troops and naval infantry backed by Bastion and Bal anti-ship missile systems along the Arctic coast. Russia has built a modernized a chain of bases, including Nagurskaya and Franz Joseph Land, its northmost base, plus bases with S-300, 400 air defenses, and on islands like Novaya Zemlya, Severная Zemlya, and Wrangel, creating an air defense umbrella over much of the Russian Arctic. We do see it here as well. So recent reporting shows that they have a new radar, right, and anti-drone systems, including Chinese-made systems. And this is where China sort of comes a little bit in play. So this is happening in Nagurskaya. This is, again, another base. It has been visibly upgraded since 2017, right? On the side of the Bering Strait, the U.S. is hardening radars and missile defense. On the other side, Russia is extending air defenses and coastal missiles all the way to the Arctic islands, both sides preparing for a domain that used to be frozen out of geopolitics, right? And if we look at it this way, no, this is China. I'm going to talk about it soon. Where do I have it? This is also training routes. Okay. Well, this one sort of shows it a little bit. What else? No, there was the one that I really wanted to show. Where you saying is tiny. This one. Here. You see the Russian side, Norway, Canada, and all other countries. And essentially, this is what everyone is positioning for, right? And whatever is melting, it will be up for grabs, essentially. So, now, as to icebreaker and shipping advantage, I know I shared this story earlier, but I just want to repeat myself if you haven't heard it yet. So last year in July, we were on the off-the-record call with Pentagon. This was under Biden administration. And the whole talk was about ICE Pact, having nothing to do with immigration authorities or anything. ICE Pact talking about icebreakers. And in all transparency, they were saying that in the US, we have about 5 icebreakers, and we don't even know if they work. Finland would have another 4. We don't even know if they work. But how many would we need if we were to defend ourselves from, let's say, Chinese invasion or Russian invasion? And in that regard, they said around 76. So see how far behind we were. Now, when Trump met with Stubb, the president of Finland, and he recently announced that Finland has sold us 5 icebreakers. Those are the 5 icebreakers where Finland wasn't really sure if they still work, because those are there since World War II, haven't been really tested. This is what essentially we bought from Finland, because we want to get the old tech, advance it, and mass produce it together with Finland, together with Canada, essentially. So that ICE Pact, in which President Biden at that point did invest, I think it was around $2 billion with extension for more, was an idea of collaboration between the US, Canada, and Finland to mass produce those icebreakers at scale. When Trump came in January, he vetoed the whole thing, scratched it, and he said, I will be dealing with every single country separately, because essentially he just wants to make money off of it. Kind of misunderstanding the whole purpose of collaboration, because one side would have an intel, other could mass produce it. Also, part of ICE Pact, it was like, parts would be done here, assembly would be in different location, and intel would come from a third location. So essentially, they were collaborating to speed up the process, and that, is not the case now. So in Russia, right? Russia operates the world's only nuclear-powered icebreaker. And it's a fleet of icebreakers. Now, 8 ships are there, including the modern project 22220. so 4 twos and a 0 vessels. They're called Arctica, Sibir, Ural, and Yakutia, with more under construction, such as Chukotka and the new 350 MW icebreaker, plus the huge project, which is called 10510 Russia, and it's coming mid-decade. So they are again, building icebreakers at scale. This is done together with China. China does sponsor it. Russia has the intel, but then China still is, helping to advance whatever technology they do have. Again, it's done together with them. They're aiming to build out that fleet by 2035-ish. So Moscow's goal is year-round navigation on the Northern Sea Route, the so-called NSR. And this is what actually, I do have maybe, yes, you see here, right? So on the right, the red one, the far right, Northern Sea Route, so the NSR. So that's their goal for year-round operation. For that, they need the icebreakers, right? So the trade would never stop, and it does connect China with Europe in that regard. So they also aim to turn it into major Asia-Europe corridor. Recent reports highlight large investments in ports, satellites, and training, including Russian programs to train Chinese sailors for Arctic operations. Now, this is also sped up, and it's at scale as well. Why? Because they need to enlarge the scope of the shadow fleet. As I mentioned in our recent deep dive, and if you're here on YouTube, you can watch it again. The shadow fleet is very much profiting for China, and it's profitable for China. Of course, it's profitable for Russia, but it's also profitable for those hubs, right? The hubs like Kazakhstan, the hubs like Greece and Turkey, who essentially get the goods coming from Russia, and they relabel it, they change the flag on whatever ships they're using, and this is essentially the basis of the shadow fleet, and they continue selling it so they can bypass sanctions. Now, here's where we have to pivot to China. So China proclaimed itself a near-Arctic state, and they're building the Polar Silk Road. Everything has to be silk with China, right? So this happened in 2018, and it happened kind of in a very Asian way, right? So they used the white paper, right, this Arctic white paper. They put it out as sort of a study done by a think tank, right? So it didn't come from Beijing and Xi Jinping announcing it. It sort of like came as they said, a logical conclusion. So China called itself a near-Arctic state. Obviously, they're not. And promoted a Polar Silk Road, an Arctic extension of the Belt and Road centered on shipping and energy. And if we go back to this thing, you kind of will see their point, right? The blue one. So the key concepts are, in its, so 7 years on, right? So 2018, now 7 years later, analysts say China's Arctic scorecard is mixed. So some projects stalled, but Beijing is still deeply involved in Arctic shipping, LNG, and science, especially via cooperation with Russia. Now, without getting too excited, it is stalled because, they started in 2018. During the Olympic Games, Putin traveled to... this was in 2021. He traveled to China. Xi Jinping said, don't start any wars before the Olympic Games end. But what did happen between 2018 and 2021, right? In 2022, forgive me, COVID happened. And COVID is what essentially, and a lot of analysts and diplomats would come to this conclusion, that COVID did delay the invasion of Ukraine. Because if we do monitor any type of troops deployment, or when they were dragging tanks literally from the Asian part of Russia to Ukraine, I mean, you can get a map and see what it is and how fast it would be, right? Fast. It would take years literally to drag the tanks. And that's what they were preparing for. So Putin was essentially waiting. Then after COVID, he was traveling to Beijing. There were the Olympic Games, and Xi Jinping said, wait until the Olympic Games are over. And that's exactly what manifested in this February 23rd, Ukrainian time, right? So now, 7 years later, they're not really interested in building out this type of polar silk road, because they are, again, profiting from the shadow fleet routes. And if you paid attention during our last live stream, you saw how well developed the shadow fleet actually is. I think I'm hanging here. So give me a second. Let me just disappear for 1 second. I'll be right back. And I'm back. Okay, let's see if this is better. All right, it is better. I didn't want to, be like a frozen Quasimodo here. Okay, so let me finish the China part, and then I get to questions. So, recent reporting says that Russia is training Chinese crews for the NSR, right? The one route that they're using, the red one on the map, and relying on Chinese built ships now to move sanctioned Russian LNG through Arctic waters, effectively internationalizing the route. So China is, Russia in this case, is ready and willing and doing already, sharing their trade route with China. So, and they're training them, but China does produce the ships, which Russia is not able to do so. They're at war and they're expanding the war. So you see, they're very much collaborating on this. Now, experts say China doesn't have Arctic coastline, but between its near Arctic state narrative and its partnership with Russia, Beijing is quietly becoming a rule shaper in Arctic shipping, including routes that open right above Alaska. And here comes Trump, who's very much interested in money, especially if the money is giving him some cash, right? If he can own a percentage, right? Speaking about socialism, when he can own, he meaning the state, but essentially it's his sovereign fund, which probably will disappear with him together. So, in one way or another, he's interested in monetizing everything. This is what they discuss with Putin in Anchorage, right? Where Putin is sort of bringing China as a game player, right, into this collaboration in the Arctic, which again would give, if we think about this drill baby drill project, and if US were to collaborate with Russia and China, what they would need to do to have is access to Alaska. And here's a question of Canada, right? If Canada is not involved, their space and their waters would be violated. So and Canada is sort of taking a very different route, right? Which leads me here to Canada's Arctic plans and NORAD, right? And their partner and potential friction point. So, but first, let me get into some questions. So, does Russia have indigenous people in the north like we do in Canada? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. They kind of, and Russia is very racist in that regard, because I remember I didn't grow up in Russia, nor I'm Russian, but we would share different programs on television, and they would be drawing people in a certain way and, having anecdotes and all that kind of stuff. So yes, they certainly have. And most of them don't even speak Russian, right? If you really go deep into the Asian side, they would rather speak Chinese. Trump only collaborates with Epstein-like people. Sorry, had to say it, right? Yeah. So this would take the place of Panama Canal, right? Sending shipping through north because it's shorter. So all the world powers want their piece. Yes. You nailed it. And this is, without going further, this is the good news. Nobody's interested to bomb anything, but everybody is interested in owning exactly what everybody owns, right? Because if you look at this, again, let's go back to this map here. If you think about, where is it? This part? No. Yeah, this is what China wants, right? This is what they're already operating. If you think about Europe, this is the routes that they have, and then they want to expand it to the Arctic, right? So, no, this is Canada. Where did I have this whole thing? I just showed it to you. Yeah, maybe this one. So, yeah, essentially everybody owns a part of the trade route, and everybody wants to own the entire part. And the problem is that, see, US did play a role of this stabilizing force, and we would have diplomatic agreements, right? And this was Biden's stance without defending him or anyway, but his stance was, okay, you're interested in what I have, I'm interested in what you have, so we should have diplomatic agreements, right? Because it really wouldn't solve any problems if all nuclear powers would be fighting each other in the Arctic. I mean, it will take one person to get triggered in one way or another, and you're dealing with quite crazy people, right? You're dealing with people where Xi Jinping looks kind of stable, right? You're dealing with Putin, you're dealing with Trump, and then you have Xi. And this tells you a lot, because what he does to his adversaries to this day, and how he executes people, that, I don't think we need to even mention that. So, but that's where we are, and weird players at hand. So, as to Canada, in 2022, Canada announced 38.6 billion Canadian dollars to be invested over 20 years into modernizing NORAD, focusing on new over-the-horizon radars, command and control, and forward operating locations. But again, I just mentioned to you, whatever comes from the United States comes with the agreements. You can't use it against the United States. You can't use it against anybody else without U.S. permission. So let's put it this way, it is kind of compromised. In 2024, 2025, Ottawa moved from talk to action, right? So they launched Canada-Nordic Strategic Dialogue on Arctic security. So they started raising this question as to, okay, you guys are all interested, but we are literally here. So how's that going to look like? Right? Why would anybody decide? Because if, again, what I try to emphasize here, if Trump manages to bow down to Putin this low, that there will be collaboration between China and Russia and US in Alaska, Canadian space is violated the time it's been signed into whatever law they imagine, right? So when it comes to Canada, this is the defense system at this point. So they launched the Canada-Nordic Strategic Dialogue on Arctic security. A major purchase followed of an Australian over-the-horizon radar system, which cost around 6 billion Canadian dollars to improve Arctic early warning. And if you look at it, that's where it all stationed. Also, they invested 420 million Canadian dollars to sustain a year-round Arctic military presence, building on Inuit Rangers, right? As you see here, I also have another. This is the scope of radar that would be protecting the waters all around Canada, as you see here. This is also another scope of radar. Now, then followed the Prime Minister Carney era, where he, practically and pragmatically thinking, we can like it, we can dislike it, but it is what it is. His way of thinking is, or seems to be, from my perspective, perhaps you share it as well, that we cannot fight US. We cannot fight China. We cannot fight Russia. We cannot even really count on Europeans, because all of us are stuck owning this shred from the United States that we cannot even use without their permission. So what are we talking even about? So then he thinks, okay, what do people really, really, really protect? Money, assets, income, profit. This is what drives China. This is what, I wouldn't even say it drives Russia. What drives Russia is nonsense, right? They want to expand. They're the octopus. They want to be everywhere. They want to sear the pot. They want to, get more land. Have you seen Russia on the map? Like, makes no sense. They certainly are not interested in money because they're wasting money. They're not interested in protecting lives because they wasted over 1 million people, those young soldiers that's supposed to build families and hold up economy in Russia. So what are they interested in is, I guess, satisfying Putin's pervert ambitions. But China is interested in money, and Carney knows it. And Carney met with Xi Jinping. And remember, we had no readout from that. Although PMO, Prime Minister's Office in Ottawa, is really good producing readouts. That readout was so vanilla would be jealous. It was like, oh, we talked and we are interested in peace and we're interested in trade and world freedom, that type of story. But what they talked about is exactly those trade routes. Because Carney's talk is, I have what you want, deal with me, right? So Carney now has framed Arctic spending as defending sovereignty and responding to US pressure under Trump on defense spending. So he is converting everything into dollars, away from we're sovereign, elbows up, as to this is our money, this is our asset. You want to utilize our asset, how you want to solve it. Canada is also eyeing Arctic minerals and shipping, and I put extensive article yesterday about it. The links are also in yesterday's newsletter. Please read it. I literally put bullet points so you can dive into it and kind of dissect what's in it. So it's overlapping views on Northwest Passage versus International Strait and how to handle greater traffic near Alaska and Canada's north. So what Canada did is investing around $1 trillion into mass digging and producing and all that kind of stuff. Yes, they're also investing in sort of balancing it climate-wise. But I know a lot of people are disliking it, rightfully so, that it goes against the Canadian stance and strategy on climate. I totally do understand it. But see it more, and I'm not defending Carney, I'm not Canadian. From my angle, again, it looks like he's using the main interest that is driving force of China that does sponsor Russia, China that does control Russia that does control Trump in one way or another, right? He's using their main incentive against their plans, right? So, for Alaska, Canada is both shield and mirror. NORAD ties their security together, but they may diverge on questions like who controls new Arctic shipping lanes. So Canada will produce more. Canada will sell more to China. China will start with Canada monitoring those routes. And good luck to Donald Trump trying to negotiate a deal with Canada so he can also use the routes, because he is doing his drill baby drill in Alaska. Unless he wants to sit on everything he's drilling, he will need to sell it. And in that regard, he will be in the position of asking Carney and Xi Jinping whether he can start using those routes. So, okay. Vanilla would be jealous, right? I'm Canadian. I will defend Carney. He's doing great. Even this, right, Mike? And Mike, I agree in a way where pragmatism is not what what drives me. I'm an empathetic person. I rather lose, but everybody feels well. This is right, and I'm not. Thankfully, I'm not leading Canada or any other country, but defense and sovereignty is really at stake here. So, of course, we all wish for Canada to have nuclear capabilities and be like, all right, whatever, you guys line up, tell me, what you got here. But because everybody, and that's why I mentioned this whole USC situation with people, countries relying on US approval to use anything in their even own defense. Like, who the hell signed it? You were so bamboozled after World War II that US is that super dude with the big D energy that will protect everybody and swing it and all that kind of stuff, that you just gave up your rights. And also, how interesting from US standpoint to bring up those contracts and make your customers, right? Because in US, we're in capitalism, customer is king. But you put your customer in such position that they can't move anywhere. They're paying, right? And now with Trump coming in and demanding 5% of everybody's GDP to be invested in buying more from United States, like with these circumstances that you can't even use it, that's like bogus. That's why in tonight's newsletter, you'll see Netherlands stops buying military equipment from US. I think Canada will follow with the F-35s, right? France also stops. England. And they also use the Venezuela question. By the way, we're going to have a very fantastic interview next week with I hope it will be next week. It could have been today, but unfortunately I was recording something else. With a senior fellow at Council on Foreign Relations, Will Freeman, who has debated somebody from Heritage Foundation and others on the Venezuela situation. And I really loved his way of analyzing and the point. So I would love to for you to hear directly from him and analyzing what U.S. is doing in Venezuela. Also, we can start a war over the weekend, so it kind of works well if we talk next week, because I think there will something follow, right? Because Trump needs deflection from the Epstein files. Also, they started this new process, and DOJ is investigating connection between Democrats and Epstein files, or Epstein himself, and here with blocking the release of the file. So they're working towards that. They need the change of narrative in the media. So something might happen over the weekend. But I digress. Countries are waking up. They do understand what's at stake. They over-rely on the United States. They can't get out of this abusive relationship because you have no money, you have nowhere to go, and all the friends are, just looking at their empty pockets like, I don't know where to go, I can't even defend myself. And they're repositioning themselves. I just wish they were to wake up faster and sooner and see Ukraine for what it is. Ukraine is your God's help that just miraculously survived this war, is fighting, is innovating, is producing weapons at scale, or drones, right, that you really need now at scale, and to produce this at speed. And it's there, and they're willing to do it for you, and they have experience, right? 4 years ago, if all this shit that we're discussing here were happening, but Ukraine is not there with capabilities, it would be very different. So I really wish for Europe to wake the hell up. So, okay. So economic stakes in Alaska, energy, minerals, ports. Let's cruise through it. So oil and gas. Alaska's North Slope still produces around 0.43 million barrels a day, about 3.3% of U.S. oil, nearly all from the Arctic region. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, right, has been targeted by Trump recently, remains a political battlefield. The Trump administration is now moving to reopen the entire coastal plain to oil and gas leasing, reversing Biden-era protections, and reviving long-running environmental and indigenous rights clashes. Also, Alaska LNG mega project, which is also not mega, like MEGA, mega project, which also is supported by Canada. It's about $44 billion worth, aims to ship North Slope gas via the 800-mile pipeline to Nikiski and Kenai Peninsula, and then to Asian markets. State officials talk about exports by 2030 or 2031, supported again by the Trump administration. As to critical minerals and Ambler Road, controversial road, a 211-mile industrial road through Arctic wilderness and indigenous lands has been revived by Trump, framed as critical to accessing copper, cobalt, and rare earth and reducing dependence on China. But again, he let China buy it from him. Like, that's just, okay. Critics, including Alaska natives and environmental groups, say the project is financially shaky and will scar wilderness without delivering promises or promised benefits, rightfully so. As to ports and shipping, this is where it gets a little tricky. The U.S. has no fully developed deep draft Arctic port yet. Nothing. But it's changing. And this is the next news that Trump will tell you to celebrate. But I really want you to be smart and know where the hell this is coming from. What he will tell you to celebrate is that in August of this year, 2025, $399 million were invested under this contract into Port of Nome. Here's a map of it. Here's where it is. Okay, here it is. The little red thing. So he will tout it as his big, accomplishment. The name is being marketed as the forefront of America's Arctic. It's meant to support Coast Guard, Navy, commercial shipping as traffic through the Bering Strait increases. Okay, this has been now $399 million by Pentagon. Were invested in Port of Nome, yada, yada, yada. Okay, here's the background how this came to be. Okay, so May 2020, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers completed and signed the Chief's report for the Port of Nome modification feasibility study. That study estimated to the cost at roughly $491 million. Then the study advanced the project to Congress for authorization under the Water Resources Development Act of 2020. In December 2020, Congress formally authorized the project in this WRDA 2020, right? The Water Resources Development Act. Then in October, December 2022, 2 years later, further legislative actions increased federal cost sharing for the project and improved the economic case for Alaska infrastructure. Then in January 2024, the city of Nome signed the partnership with Pentagon, essentially. It's an agreement for project, noting that the pre-construction engineering and design, the PED, plus phase 1 construction was funded at $250 million, with the federal government covering 90% and the non-federal sponsor being 10%. Transition into contract onward, the actual construction contract was awarded in August 2025 to Kiewit Infrastructure West Company, valued at about $399.4 million. So please be less excited when, in a bit, he starts, saying that he built the first port in Alaska. Now, a bit of a contrast here. Russia has nuclear and icebreakers and year-round Arctic shipping. The U.S. is only now building its first deep-water Arctic port in Nome, but it's a strategic catch-up move right at Alaska's front door. And this is all works for the benefit of Canada. Because if they work together with China, China is already building out the routes, right? And they kind of utilizing whatever Russia has, and they can start working with Canada directly. They're bypassing US, right? And that port wouldn't be as useful. Michael says, since China is financing those Russian shadow fleet routes, isn't it smart for Carney to work with? I just said it. Yep. Okay, so what has changed between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, right? Bit of a case study. I'm so nerdy. I made a whole thing here. Okay, let me read it out. So, okay, energy and resources development. Last thing, and I will finish bothering you for today. So, under Biden, 2022, U.S. National Strategy for Arctic Region, the NSAR, emphasized climate change, environmental protection, and cooperation with Alaska Native communities. This is what they prioritize for Alaska. Under Trump 2.0, a strong pivot toward unlocking Alaska's resource potential. An executive order unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential. January 2025, he signed it the first day he became president. Directed or got inaugurated. It directed all agencies to resign or revise regulations from 2021-2025 period and to expedite LNG pipeline and export infrastructure in Alaska. Also, Trump administration resigned a 2024 rule limiting leases in the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska, the NPRA, opening vast acreage for oil and gas leasing. Biden administration in 2023 proposed protections for over 13 million acres in Arctic refuge and NPRA. Trump is reversing or opening these lands. So Biden treated Alaska largely as climate project. Trump is monetizing it. So, as to security and military posture. So, under Biden, the NSAR clearly labeled security as pillar number 1 when it comes to Alaska, which also is connected to climate, right? If you drill, baby, drill, you heat up, right, the spot, it starts melting even more. The flooding will happen, but also whatever becomes land, right, will become for grabs, and people start, or the countries will start utilizing for their sources. So it is very much related to security. And also, if flooding is happening, you have to invest more funds, so it starts costing you more. So this was sort of the strategy for Biden, right? Slow down this process, start negotiating. Yes, the trade routes are happening, but don't monetize Alaska. Monetize your access to the trade route so you can work with others. And if they're entangled in this business entanglement with you, they will not be fighting you, right? And if US were to work with China on these trade routes, not drilling together on US soil, but to work with China strategically, then this would really pause Chinese invasion of Taiwan, which at this point, as we're headed into it, will happen in 2026. So see, like, there was more than Ukraine. There was part of where China is entangled in business doings, and that would slow them down. So this was sort of the Biden understanding. Now, under Trump 2.0, while a full new Arctic strategy hasn't been publicly detailed, like anything else, everything is a concept of a plan. The shift in operational emphasis is clear: resource access, infrastructure build out, and speed of permitting, less prioritizing climate mitigation. So there was a Reuters piece that recently came out that noted key U.S. Arctic research official who departed the Pentagon, as the U.S. shifted away from climate change to national security related research. And this person was not, was not willing to participate in this monetization of Arctic. Alaska itself. So emphasis moves from Arctic as a zone of cooperative resilience in climate protection to Arctic as strategic front and asset. Anything for sale. As to climate, under Biden, stronger protections of public lands, explicit commitment to Indigenous participation, ecosystems, methane gas concerns, right? Under Trump, rolling back protections, permitting of mining, roads also through sensitive lands, right? Trump's Interior Department, head of Trump's Interior Department said, quote, by reopening the coastal plain and advancing key infrastructure, we are strengthening energy independence. But you have to sell it to somebody. What do you? Anyway, where Biden placed environment and sovereignty of local and native communities upstream in policy, Trump is placing resource extraction and, again, monetization. Everything's for sale. And lastly, international cooperation. Under Biden, emphasis on alliances, Arctic cooperation, rules-based order. Trump, policy signal is more transactional, competitive, maximize U.S. advantage. I would say maximize his own advantage in resources and strategic posture, less publicly emphasis on multilateral climate regime frameworks. U.S. is, for instance, opening up leasing and roads tied to national security and economic growth rather than large climate and ecosystem stewardship frameworks. And there is still some alliance activity, right? So nobody had invaded us yet. And also on the icebreaker deals, right? But the lens is slightly different. So from essentially, to sum it all up, we went from let's cooperate and preserve the Arctic to let's just heat it up, monetize it, everything's for sale. Then we claim it, name it, figure it out. So, and it's 3 nuclear powers. Like, it doesn't really look good. For instance, today, right, I attended, well, not today, last week, I attended the APAC review with diplomats. There was also the ambassador of U.S., current one, Casey Mays, to APAC. And he was talking about it like, we want to sell you more LNG to China. We want to sell more to South Korea. We're here to sell more. We can sell more. This is all he talked about. And then the South Korean part was, you're demanding us to invest $350 billion just to give you as a one-time payment. This is 80% of our reserve in US dollars. We can't do it. The prime minister said, I literally will be impeached if I agree to this crap. And then they agreed to $2 billion per year payment to US. Again, nothing is in writing. There is no agreement that has been in writing that is in any way, shape, or form signifies any type of commitment by anybody. There is nothing in writing with anybody except for minerals deal with Ukraine that US would have access to drilling and monetizing Ukraine if the war ends. But this, if you were to think about Putin demanding Ukraine to give up the exact land that Trump got access to, exactly what I mentioned about a year ago, that this will lead to half a year ago. No, it's actually a year. Wow. This would lead to Trump selling the contract to Putin. So if Putin were to occupy the land and own it, Trump would then sell the contract to him. And then Russia could be drilling and getting those minerals, right? So altogether, about South Korea, coming back to that. Today, they finally produced something in writing. This is the first thing we saw. And the only thing mentioned in that agreement is that South Korea is agreeing to pay 15% tax on South Korean imports, which essentially is tax on us, the buyers in the US. That's it. That's all they agreed to. They don't mention the $2 billion. They don't mention the one-time payment. They don't mention anything. Nothing. And in that meeting, everybody was laughing about the crown because it's from this dynasty where the emperor was so in love with gold specifically. Yes, he passed like sanctions, or he had like trade wars and sort of essentially was killed for that. But it was that specific emperor was really into gold, and so this was like a very humorous gift, although here in the US and in Europe it was so celebrated, right? Or others said, oh, South Korea is bending over. But my point is, there's nothing in writing. There's also nothing in writing with the Arctic. And if Trump were to get into something with China and Russia in Alaska, again, with nothing in writing, that leads to misunderstandings, put it this way. And that could cause something, right? Unless he's willing to give up Alaska altogether. So good news, everybody's money is tied into this. So nobody's interested in bombing this. But everybody at the same point is also interested in kind of owning it. So we'll see how this works. I think Canada goes more towards China. Trump will be locked out. Russia will work with whatever China tells them to work with. Europe will essentially also trade with China, which they're aiming. Their only problem is if China does overflow their market with cheap products, because they're kind of have less exports to US. They have to figure it out. And I think India is balancing this. And so we're being literally, physically, and metaphorically bypassed. So, but nobody will be bombed. Okay. Irene is here. Hello. It's 4 p.m. I'm going to go back in the beginning. Yes, please do. Please do. And comment, and I'll check the comment or answer any questions later. Keeping the chat current. I'm watching the beginning. Yay. Okay. All right. Awesome. It's a good watch. Thank you for calling it a tax. Yeah. And I mean, those imports are just tax on us. We are paying more for coffee. We are paying more for whatever goods. It's not on them. I mean, like, look at Walmart prices. And as much as Trump sends us this bullshit, like today, the last thing I'm going to mention, I'll let you go. He sends this readout. I have to find it. Did I delete it? I have joy deleting it. But anyway, I think I kept it. I think it's here. Right? Yes. So, from the White House. We're making big progress on prices and will keep working to make sure everyone benefits. President Donald J. Trump inherited economic mess when he took office. Years of mismanagement under Biden. Blah, 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 blah. Since day one, the Trump administration has been on a mission to tame Biden's inflation crisis, stop the sky-high Biden price increase. See how, and this is my whole point, because foreign governments and foreign news agencies are also getting this piece of shit. And they're thinking it's a clear readout. and then they inform their public and their governments. And that's what leads to their diplomats going on a pilgrimage to Washington, D.C., to convince the king to deal with them. Even though this here is the biggest lie you've ever seen, to the point where our job reports is so bad that they're pretending that they will not be releasing it because of the government shutdown. Oh, give me a goddamn break. So, thank you for deep dive. Thank you. Hope you feel better. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm done bothering you. I will be seeing you on Monday. So what I'm trying to do is to report news in real time, because what I feel is I kind of sit on the news until 5 or 6, and then I present all of it onto you. And if you like it, cool. But if some people want to kind of hear, the news as they come out, I will record the videos and put it out. And then around 5 p.m., you will get the playlist with all the news. So you can I'll give you a link and you watch video one after another. And then we meet for the Q&A. Now, what I wanted to mention to our Honest Plus members, and if you're not, please consider it. This was our deep dive. This is what we're doing on Fridays, okay? This was open for folks to check out what this is. So we meet on Zoom. Zoom. This time is going to be Google Play, because I figured it has no limitation. It's better. So on Google Play, we're meeting every last Friday. That's when we talk off the record. And I have a bunch of information to share with you. Also, I would be at the UN next Tuesday. So, yes, Tuesday. And there will be more content to share that I'm not interested to share publicly. And for the reason of last Friday, this month in November, falling on Black Friday, and I'm sure you will be with your families. There's Thanksgiving, Black Friday, that weekend is sort of like messy to kind of get on Zoom and start talking about politics. Would you mind if we met next week, so the 21st of November, just one time, so you can enjoy your long weekend with your family? I think it would be just a bit more appropriate than seeing me on your holiday almost weekend. So on 21st, we'll be meeting on Zoom. You can ask any questions. I'll answer it. It's not recorded. Well, Google Play. It's not recorded. And you can be, with camera, off camera, whatever. But none of that information is going anywhere public. Okay, so I would love this month to meet on 21st so you can enjoy the last weekend of the month together with your loved ones. Good to have another Canadian here. Yay! Okay, perfect. 21st is good, Tidy. Okay, great. Irene said, okay, perfect. So 21st, 6 p.m., we're meeting, get a drink, get a snack, or have dinner with us, whatever. We'll be meeting on Google Play. Okay, so thank you so much for watching. I hope it was useful. And then we progress with the news. Also, I'm working on the website to put all our videos and newsletters and all the articles. There's articles also coming out through the day, and the breaking news. So everything I hate breaking news, like actual news, stuff I put on Blue Sky, essentially, on our site. It also will be in mobile format. You can also have notifications. All of it will be in one place, which I think it's important because I'll tell you off the record. Anyway, because we're being pushed by different sides, right? Because I say what I say, and it's not always welcomed by everybody. So in that regard, having our space on our website where we own the domain, you have your safe checkout, whatever, not the checkout, but log in. Nobody has access to it. I think that's the safest bet. So that's what I'm working on. Okay, so see you off the record on 21st. And see you on live videos and whatever starting Monday. Okay. Thank you again. I appreciate you, and see you again. See you next week. Have a very safe weekend. Where's my thing? Keep your head on a swivel per usual, and please, please feel well. And if you see Nova virus, don't take it. It's not good. Okay. Have a good night.